Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We have a large amount of registrants today, so we're just going to give it a couple minutes as people are let into the webinar before we do introductions of Dr. Greene and get started. So just a few more moments and we will do some introductions and get the webinar started. Thank you for your patience. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. We'll get started in a few moments. We're just going to allow a couple more minutes for people to join the webinar. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to get us started this morning. My name is Carrie Woodcock, and I'm the Executive Director for Maine Parent Federation. I want to welcome you to our webinar with Dr. Ross Greene this morning. Dr. Greene is a child psychologist who is known nationally, and we're lucky to have him here in the state of Maine. He has created the Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, CPS model, which he'll be talking about today. He's been on the faculty at Harvard Medical School for over 20 years and is the founding director of the nonprofit Life's in the Balance. He is working with the Maine Department of Education to provide the collaborative and proactive solutions to local school districts. And today's webinar is intended to give you more information about the practice and also about how you can access the partnerships. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Greene. And thank you for joining us today, Dr. Greene. The forum is yours.
Thank you. And Carrie, thank you for making this possible. This is a big issue in Maine these days, now that legislation has passed, highlighting the need to reduce restraint and seclusion in our schools. And fortunately, we have a rather enlightened Department of Education here, and a shout out here both to Bear Shea and also to Commissioner Pender-Macon for their receptivity to finding ways to reduce restraint and seclusion in Maine's schools, and also appreciating the need to do so. In my mind, there should be no doubt about the need to do so. What interferes is often training and mindsets. Those are things that can be changed. Let there be no doubt, I totally get it, that there are some very difficult kids in our schools who are capable of some very scary, dangerous, seemingly unpredictable behaviors. So I understand why people could end up using restraint and seclusion. I also understand that no educator I've ever come across wants to use restraint and seclusion. Even if somebody doesn't want to, sometimes they find themselves in situations in which they feel that it's necessary. So a really important goal is to dramatically reduce the number of situations in which people feel that restraint and seclusion is even a possibility. Now, for some people, that sounds very far-fetched, given the population of kids that they're working with, given what they're envisioning that goes on in their classrooms. It is not far-fetched. It's been done in lots of schools, including in quite a few schools in Maine. So what you're going to get from me here is about a 40-minute overview of the highlights of the collaborative and proactive solutions model. Then we'll spend some time taking questions. But I want to let you know that there is a website on the Department of Education. There's a page on the Department of Education website here in Maine that has a lot of the resources that are available for free to schools throughout the state. That's why we did it. This is a partnership between Lives in the Balance, the nonprofit I founded that is based in Maine, and the Maine Department of Education. It is easy to say, don't do these practices anymore. It's another thing to give people the tools they need to not use these practices anymore. These are the tools you need to not do these practices anymore, or almost never. So let's jump in here because our time is short. But the reason I'm bringing up the page on the Department of Education website in Maine, which I will be putting up on our last slide, is because that is one of the ways in which you can contact Lives in the Balance if you would like help reducing restraint and seclusion in your school, or even if you are a parent who is interested in having your school access the resources. Here we go. What it requires when one is interested in reducing restraint and seclusion is different lenses, different timing, and different practices. Different lenses and different timing begins with how we're thinking. And there's a lot of late thinking going on out there. And you'd much rather be early. Late is crisis management. Early is crisis prevention. If we are asking the question, what should we do when we're thinking late? And our interventions are going to be late. And I'm going to give you some examples on the next slide of what we might call late interventions. Some of them are very popular. That fact notwithstanding, they're late. And our goal is to be early. So the better question we should be asking is, what should we be doing so we don't end up being late in the first place? Late is when we are thinking we need to restrain or seclude a kid. That's what happens late, as you'll see on an upcoming graphic. What should we be doing early so we don't end up being late is the question. Once we have the answer to that question, and once we're doing those things that we should be doing early, we're almost never late. And if we're almost never late, we're almost never thinking of using restraint and seclusion. All right. This graphic is up. I'm not ready for the graphic yet. Here, this is going to shake some of you up, but that's okay. Here's my non-exhaustive list of very popular interventions that are late. Taking a break is late. This is very common. There's thousands of kids in the state of Maine right now who are taking a break from a task that they're struggling with. But they were struggling with the task before they took the break. So I'm not allergic to giving kids a break, but I've worked with many, many kids who were students who were taking 40 to 50 breaks a day, but were never getting addressed what was causing the behaviors that caused caregivers to think they needed a break in the first place. And that's because taking a break doesn't solve those problems that are causing their struggles. Taking a break is late. It occurs once a student is already becoming escalated or frustrated. Calming corners are late. I'm not allergic to calming corners either. It's just that I've worked with, when do kids access the calming corner? When they're not calm. When are they not calm? When there's an expectation they're having difficulty meeting. I was going to say I'm not allergic to calming corners. It's just that calming corners are late, and calming corners don't help kids meet the expectations that are causing the behaviors that are causing them, their caregivers, to feel they need the calming corner in the first place. Calming corners are late. This is the one that shakes people up a little bit more. Some of the coping strategies we're teaching kids, a lot of the coping strategies we're teaching kids, teach them what to do once it's already late. A lot of the coping strategies we teach kids, whether it's recognizing what color you are, or taking deep breaths, or counting to 10, teach kids what to do once they're already frustrated. Let me paraphrase. Once it's already late. I'm not allergic to coping strategies. I'm not allergic to teaching kids what to do once they're already frustrated. But if I was going to prioritize coping strategies, I would be prioritizing strategies that help kids solve problems so they don't get frustrated over those problems in the first place. And I would prioritize helping their caregivers lead them through the problem-solving process so that they all get really good at it. A lot of the coping strategies we teach kids to use teach them what to do once it's already late. Obviously, de-escalating is late. Like I said, this is a training issue. A lot of the training we do with educators to help them deal with kids who have behavioral challenges, teach them how to de-escalate well, but de-escalating is late. Restraint and seclusion, definitely late, as you'll see on the next graphic. Discipline referrals are late. Detention, suspension, expulsion, paddling, late, 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 late. Reducing restraint and seclusion, as well as dramatically reducing our use of these punitive exclusionary disciplinary practices, means being early. So for the next little bit, we're going to talk about what it looks like to be early. But first, we have to use our imaginations. What would it look like if our school or our program or our classroom, the classrooms in which we're restraining and secluding a lot, what would it look like if we weren't being late, but we're so out in front of what's going on with each kid that we're almost exclusively being early? All right, this graphic sums up everything I just covered, but it's an important one. This is the sequence of restraint and seclusion. And what you're seeing here is 5 bubbles occurring in a downward sequence. That's symbolic. The colors of the bubbles are meaningful. In blue, everything that's early, true crisis prevention. In red, everything that's late. We don't want to be late. We want to be early. So what's early? The blue bubble. Figuring out what expectations a student is having difficulty meeting that are causing their concerning behaviors. Those unmet expectations in the collaborative and proactive solutions model are called unsolved problems. And solving those problems proactively so that we never find ourselves in the red. And if that's what we were doing in most places, in all the places where kids with concerning behaviors are, there would be virtually no need for restraint and seclusion. The problem, of course, is that that is not what we are mostly doing. What are we mostly doing? What is the prototypical adult first response When a kid is having difficulty meeting a particular expectation, red bubble number 1, insist harder, push harder, founded on the belief that pushing kids harder to meet expectations we already know they're having difficulty reliably meeting elicits better performance. I have not observed that. Certainly not in the case of kids with concerning behaviors. In the case of kids with concerning behaviors, pushing them harder to meet expectations we already know they're going to be having difficulty meeting reliably elicits red bubble number 2, behavior, concerning behavior that communicates something to us that we already knew. I'm having difficulty meeting that expectation. And by the way, in this model, you'll hear me repeat this in one slide. In this model, behavior, we've all heard the cliche, behavior is communication. What is concerning behavior communicating? That there's an expectation the kid is having difficulty meeting. That's it. But I want you to notice something very important about behavior. It's late. The expectation the kid was having difficulty meeting, that already happened. The behavior that communicates that the kid is having difficulty meeting that expectation comes after that. Concerning behavior is late, and interventions that are focused on modifying those concerning behaviors are interventions that are focused on what's late. If the behavior is what we might call big enough, what happens next? Red bubble number 3, based on our training, our crisis prevention training. Crisis prevention training? How could what I'm about to say be crisis prevention? We are now very late. Based on our crisis prevention, but really crisis management training, what do we do next? What we were trained to do next? We try to de-escalate the kid. Because we are now very late, that often doesn't get the job done. Often it does, often it doesn't. Either way, you're late. When it doesn't, what do we do next? What we were trained to do next, but by our crisis prevention, but really crisis management training, we restrain or seclude the kid, founded on the belief that restraining and secluding kids keeps us and them safer. Did you know that there is not a single study, not one, telling us that restraint and seclusion keeps anybody safer? In fact, the data that I'm aware of, as well as anecdotal experience, tells me that restraint and seclusion is when we and the kids are at higher risk for getting hurt. This is a very important graphic. It makes very explicit what's early and what's late. And if we're going to change our lenses and our timing and our practices, we got to be early. And we're going to have to focus on something different than the kids' concerning behavior. What are we going to be focused on instead? The problems that are causing those concerning behaviors. Unsolved problems. How do we know they're unsolved? Because if they were solved, they wouldn't still be causing concerning behavior. All right, let's change this up. Whenever we're trying to help schools and treatment facilities end their use of restraint and seclusion, or at least dramatically reduce their use of restraint and seclusion, we got to change this up. We got to start being early. And that means that there are a few paradigm shifts that need to occur. Here's paradigm shifting component number 1. You've already heard it. Instead of focusing on a kid's concerning behavior and modifying it and teaching and reteaching adaptive behaviors, we are instead going to be focused on what's early, the problems that are causing those behaviors, and solving them. And this is a very big shift. especially for people who were trained the way I was. I was trained as a behaviorist. I was trained to focus on kids' concerning behaviors and using some rather straightforward behavior modification strategies to modify those behaviors. And I don't do that anymore. Not because I'm allergic to those practices, just because I don't need them anymore, and because those practices are focused on what's late, and I want to be early. Examples of what we might call unsolved problems. Quite frankly, if you're an educator, these are things you all deal with every day. And by the way, if you're an educator and you're thinking, problem solving is outside of my realm, well, you know that's not true. Teachers, educators solve problems with students all day. You've been a problem solver for a long time. This is not foreign territory. What kind of problems are we talking about here? Difficulty coming back into the classroom after recess, difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math, difficulty sitting next to Susie during circle time, difficulty coming to school on time. I could go on forever. These are some of the unsolved problems that cause concerning behaviors in schools every day. As you've already heard, it is important for us caregivers to recognize that the concerning behavior is just the signal, just the fever, just the means by which the kid is communicating that there are expectations they're having difficulty meeting. If all we're busy doing is modifying behavior, then all we're busy doing is modifying the signal, but we are not solving a single problem that way. This is huge. I'm working with some schools in Maine, as well as in Wisconsin and where else? Minnesota right now. There's an instrument that we use to help caregivers identify what we call the information that's been missing. What are this kid's lagging skills? What are this kid's unsolved problems? And when they start using that instrument, they often start getting pretty shook up because, and I was just talking about this on a call before now, you know, we all operate in our realms and pay attention to what we pay attention to. Most educators that I've encountered are very high achievers. They want to be doing it right. They don't want to miss anything. And then we have them start identifying the expectations kids are having difficulty meeting. And suddenly they start feeling rather overwhelmed over all of the information that they haven't been paying very close attention to. So in one school, the teachers have been saying to me, this happens to be a middle school, look at all these unsolved problems that we're identifying here. I said, you know, they were always there. It's just that you're now identifying them. I said, but I do have an indelicate question to ask you. What were you doing with those unsolved problems before you started identifying them? They said, well, we were paying attention to the behaviors that were being caused by those unsolved problems and sending the kid to the office, which is why that school had an astronomical number of suspensions. And that's what we're trying to change. I don't think they're going to have many this school year. And here comes the ultimate shake-up moment when people start to realize not only that all those unsolved problems are there, but also that sending the kid to the office for the behaviors that are being caused by those unsolved problems doesn't solve any of those problems. That's paradigm shifting component number one. In this model, you are focused on identifying and solving problems. You are not focused on the behaviors that are being caused by those problems and modifying them. That is huge. When it comes to lenses, when it comes to timing, since the problems are early and the behavior is late, that's huge. And when it comes to practices, once again, in this model, you're a problem solver. Now, just in case you're thinking, well, how will the kid's behavior improve if we're not busy modifying it? Here's the answer. All of the accumulated research on collaborative and proactive solutions tells us, and this is now an evidence-based model, that when you are busy solving problems with kids in the ways that you're about to hear me describe, their behavior improves every bit as much as it would have if all we were busy doing was modifying their behavior. But, and this is a very important but, if all we're busy doing is modifying the kid's behavior, the problems that are causing those behaviors remain unsolved. So when people say to me, Ross, don't you know that behavior modification strategies are evidence-based as well? I say, of course I know that. That was my training. But we can no longer be satisfied with merely improving a kid's behavior if the problems that are causing those behaviors remain unsolved. It's not good enough, and it doesn't make us safer. Paradigm shifting component number 2. By the way, I failed to mention this in the beginning. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box in Zoom here. Don't wait till the end because you may not remember what your question was. So pop them in there and I'll start answering questions in about 20 minutes. Paradigm shifting component number 2. When it comes to lenses, practices, and timing. Now that we are problem solvers, we need to think about what kind of problem solvers we want to be. We adults, us caregivers, tend to be real keen on problem solving of the unilateral kind. That's where the adult decides what the solution is and imposes it on the kid. It's where the adult decides what's getting in the kid's way and the adult decides what the solution is. And by the way, that has a lot to do with training as well. That's what we were taught to do. But that's not what you're doing in this model. In this model, the problem solving is of the collaborative kind. It's something you're doing with the kid, not to the kid. And that is a huge shift. Yes. And here's what many people respond to when I say it's going to be collaborative. What they ask, what if the kid won't talk? We find that kids will talk once we stop trying to talk with them about their concerning behavior and start trying to talk with them about problems they've been struggling with for a very long time. What if the kid is non-speaking? People solve problems collaboratively with non-speaking kids all the time. It's not that the kid isn't communicating, it's just that the kid isn't communicating through our preferred modality, the spoken word. Here's my favorite question. If we're not using consequences, how will the kid be held accountable? I think it has been to the great misfortune of a massive number of kids that for so long, we've been using the terms consequences and accountability as if they are synonyms. They are not synonyms. In fact, I'm not even sure you're holding a kid accountable when all we're doing is imposing consequences and imposing solutions. Then the kid is the passive recipient of our wisdom, isn't engaged in the problem-solving process at all. I wouldn't call that accountability. Whenever I start talking about solving problems collaboratively in every school, everywhere, the next question, when does he think we're going to do this? The 4-letter word that plagues all new initiatives in all schools and treatment facilities, T-I-M-E, time. Well, we help every school and facility figure that out. We either help them identify what we call buried time, time that actually exists, less of it these days, post-COVID, or more importantly, we help them create time, time for caregivers to be solving problems with kids. And yes, it's going to take time to solve problems with kids, but it's not going to take anywhere nearly as much time as it takes to do discipline referrals, detentions, as it takes to do what isn't working. Doing what's not working takes an enormous amount of time. The kid is fully engaged in the problem-solving process when you're implementing this model, in my opinion, as it should be. And finally, the last paradigm shift I'm going to cover is this one. When it comes to different lenses and practices and timing in particular, we got to think about our timing. Now that we are solving problems with kids and now that we are doing it collaboratively, we have to think about our timing. As you all know, a great deal of the intervention that takes place for kids with concerning behaviors in schools, but also everywhere else, takes place in the heat of the moment, emergently, reactively. Not in this model. 99.9% of what people are doing in this model is planned, proactive. That often causes people to ask, how can we be planned and proactive when we never know when the kid's going to get upset, when we never know when the kid's going to struggle, when the kid is so unpredictable? Here are the answers. The kid is not unpredictable. You know exactly when the kid's going to struggle, exactly when the kid's going to get upset, if you answer two questions right up front. Those two questions are answered by the assessment tool that I'm going to be telling you about briefly in just a few minutes. The two questions are why and when, as in, why do some kids respond so poorly to problems and frustrations? Why is this kid responding so poorly to problems and frustrations? When do kids exhibit concerning behaviors? When is this kid exhibiting concerning behaviors? The answer to the question why has been provided to us by the research that has accumulated on kids with concerning behaviors over the last 40 to 50 years. And that 40 to 50 years of research can be summarized in one sentence. Why do some kids respond so poorly to problems and frustrations? Because they're lacking the skills to respond more adaptively. Key word, skills. Missing word, motivation. There isn't a single study telling us that kids who respond poorly to problems and frustrations are poorly motivated either. That study doesn't exist. There is a mountain of research telling us they're lacking skills. Now, what skills? Here's the global skills. There's many more, but these are the global ones. Flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving, emotion regulation. Skills many of us take for granted because we got them. You don't take them for granted if you got a kid who's lacking those skills in your classroom or in your home. Fortunately, the instrument that we use in this model, called the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems, is going to help us identify this kid's lagging skills so that all of us caregivers can have the right lenses on lagging skills, not lagging motivation. When do kids exhibit concerning behaviors? We've actually already covered that. When they're having difficulty meeting certain expectations. Thank goodness. The assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems is going to help us identify this kid's unsolved problems. So we'll know what problems we could be busy solving with this kid so they don't cause concerning behaviors anymore. See, it's only unsolved problems that cause concerning behaviors. Solved problems don't. Lagging skills and unsolved problems is what we call the information that's been missing. We've known what this kid's concerning behaviors have been for a very long time. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time talking about that anymore. We've known what psychiatric diagnoses summarize those concerning behaviors for a very long time. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that anymore either. What should we be spending our time figuring out about this kid, who people may still be calling a puzzle, may still be causing a mystery? What are this kid's lagging skills? What are this kid's unsolved problems? The information that's been missing. And once that information is no longer missing, this is a very predictable kid, and intervention can be almost exclusively proactive. Wow. There's those skills again, just in case you didn't have a chance to write them down. There's many more. You'll see that when I introduce you briefly to the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. But the skills the research tells us these kids are lacking are in these 4 domains. Those are your lenses. Not manipulative, not attention-seeking, not coercive, not unmotivated, not limit testing. Those are all characterizations that flow from a mentality that is centered on motivation or the lack of it. These are the skills the research tells us these kids are lacking. These are the global skills that help us human beings respond to problems and frustrations adaptively. These are the skills that are being practiced, modeled, and enhanced by engaging kids in the process of solving problems collaboratively and proactively. So, what are the 2 most important roles that a caregiver can play in the life of a kid who's struggling? Figure out what that kid's lagging skills and unsolved problems are using the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. That's what makes intervention proactive rather than reactive. Why are we identifying lagging skills? Once again, so we're helping adults view these kids through much more compassionate, much more accurate, much more productive lenses. Why are we identifying unsolved problems? Because that's what helps us focus on the problems that are causing concerning behaviors rather than on the concerning behaviors themselves. And by the way, it's not that behavior data is completely uninformative, but behavior data only tells us that the child is having difficulty. It doesn't tell us what they're having difficulty with. That's the information that is often missing or ignored. Part 2, solve problems collaboratively and proactively. Why would we want to do that? Because it promotes a partnership between us and the kid. This is not about enemies. This is not about adversaries. When you're solving problems collaboratively and proactively, you are engaging kids in solving the problems that affect their lives. I'm always asking the question, why would you want to leave the kid out of the loop on that? When you're solving problems collaboratively and proactively, you and the kid are together, coming up with solutions that tend to be a whole lot more effective and a whole lot more durable because you're not flying solo. And as you've just heard me say, when you're solving problems collaboratively and proactively, you're not just solving problems, which is a big deal all by itself. You're not just reducing the kid's concerning behaviors, big deal all by itself. You're not just improving your relationship with the kid. You're not just improving communication with the kid. Big deals all by themselves. You are simultaneously giving the kid practice at and modeling and enhancing the skills the kid is lacking. Here it is. It's free. Don't worry. This is the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. It is available in an editable, fillable format on the Lives in the Balance website. I'll give you that web address at the end. This is how we're identifying the information that's been missing. Lagging skills at the top, unsolved problems at the bottom. My belief is that this should be the standard pre-referral triage instrument in every school in Maine and everywhere else too. This should be done before we do an FBA. This should be done before we write a behavior plan. This should be done before we start thinking about writing an IEP. This is going to give us the information that's been missing so we can tell whether we need a functional behavior assessment, whether we're going to need an IEP. And this doesn't take anywhere nearly as long as an FBA to complete. On average, this instrument's going to take 30 to 45 minutes to complete. It's completed as a team, not as an individual. So it does require a meeting, but these meetings take place already. Talk about saving time. If a school should feel that an FBA is necessary, make sure you do the LSIP first because it's going to write your FBA for you. If you feel that an IEP is still necessary, do the LSIP first. It's going to write your IEP for you. And there is a CPS flavored functional behavior assessment, a few of them, I believe, and a few CPS flavored IEPs on the Lives in the Balance website to guide you in your efforts. I would love to teach you how to use it. There is a video on the Lives in the Balance website to teach you how to use it. We don't have time for me to teach you how to use it in the time that we have allotted today, but there are all kinds of free resources on the Lives in the Balance website to help you learn a lot more about everything I'm covering quickly right now. All right, finally, how are we going to solve these problems with this student? What are our options for handling unsolved problems? Those of you who know about this model already know that we call your options Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. What I've done here is I've taken the many different ways in which adults handle problems with kids, and I've reduced them to 3 basic options. ABC provides a very nice shorthand for thinking about what are we doing and what should we be doing instead. Notice at the top, unsolved is underlined. That's because if a problem isn't unsolved, you don't need one of these plans. It's a met expectation. If a kid is coming back into the classroom after recess as well as you'd like them to, you don't need one of these plans. It's a met expectation. It's not an unsolved problem. No plan needed. If a kid is coming to school as well and as often as you'd like them to, as on time and as often as you'd like them to, you don't need a plan. It's not an unsolved problem. It's a met expectation. No plan needed. But if there's any expectation a student is having difficulty reliably meeting, even if they're meeting it sometimes, if they're not meeting it reliably, you need a plan. And you have 3 options. In this model, you're really only using 2 of them, B and C. A is really only up there because at least at this point in human evolution, it is still very popular. But you are almost never using Plan A when you're implementing this model. Plan A is where you're solving a problem unilaterally. If you want to cause a kid with concerning behaviors to get set off, use Plan A. If he gets set off, you might end up using restraint and seclusion. That can often be traced back to adults trying to get their expectations met unilaterally. Plan B is where you're solving the exact same problem collaboratively. Plan C is where you're putting a particular expectation on hold, at least for now. Let me cover B and C very quickly here. I don't have time to go into great detail about Plan C, but it's a big part of this model. Because if you rewound the tape on the vast majority of restraints and seclusions, vast majority of detention, suspension, expulsions, you would find an expectation that a kid was not able to reliably meet, and caregivers who knew that already. There's a lot to be said for putting those expectations on hold, at least for now. either because you're prioritizing, you can't work on every problem at once, or because you've concluded this kid can't even reliably meet this expectation right now. So don't think about Plan C as giving in or giving up. Think about it as prioritizing. What I call expectation management, not behavior management. When you are managing your expectations well, you almost never have to manage concerning behaviors. That's Plan C. We're helping caregivers get comfortable with Plan C. When we're helping schools implement this model, Plan C is actually very practical. Why would you want to put an expectation on a kid that you already knew the kid couldn't reliably meet? And you can't work on them all at once. You'll have to prioritize. And then Plan B. How do you solve a problem collaboratively? This is what we are helping educators get good at all over the world. There are 3 steps that are involved in solving a problem collaboratively. They are called the empathy step, the define adult concern step, and the invitation step. All kinds of video on the Lives in the Balance website to show you what those 3 steps look like. But just briefly, the empathy step is where you're gathering information from the kid about what's making it hard for them to meet a particular expectation. As I'm always telling caregivers, the empathy step is where we adults discover that what we thought was getting in the kid's way is not what's getting in the kid's way. The define adult concern step is where the adult is entering their concern into consideration. Why do they think it's important that the expectation be met? What we're often telling caregivers is, if you don't know why you think it's important that the expectation be met, then we don't know why you have that expectation. And finally, the invitation. This is where kid and caregiver are collaborating on a solution together, side by side. Boy, I could spend 2 days on Plan B. You just got a 3-minute dose. There's a lot more to know about Plan B. There's a lot more to know about the ALSIP. But here's what it looks like when you implement this model in schools. This is a school system here in Maine. You can see restraints and seclusions being dramatically reduced over time. This is what happens to discipline referrals when you are implementing this model. These data come from schools in Maine as well. Office referrals, peer regression, defiance, and disruption all plummeting. This is what happens when you implement the CPS model in an inpatient psychiatric facility. This is mechanical, chemical restraints, seclusion events, and physical holds. I know we're not here about inpatient units, but impressive data. And this is what CPS was able to accomplish right here in Maine in our then 2 and now only 1, and someday probably none, juvenile detention facilities when it comes to isolation, room confinement, segregation, and special management, as they called it back then. All right. I'm going to start answering questions. Let me go back a second. I like these 2 questions. Is it possible to completely eliminate punitive exclusionary disciplinary practices? Yes. Is it possible to completely eliminate restraint and seclusion? Let's find out. Some websites to help you along the way before I start answering questions. The Lives in the Balance website contains massive free resources on the CPS model. So does truecrisisprevention.org. And there on the screen at the bottom is the page on the Maine Department of Education website where you can you can also watch it on the Lives in the Balance website, a 75-minute instructional video featuring educators from right here in Maine talking about how they reduced their use of restraint and seclusion. That video is free, of course, and The reason it's on the DOE website is because we wanted to make it accessible to every educator in the state of Maine. But what we also want you to know is that Lives in the Balance is prepared in one way or another to help your school dramatically reduce its use of restraint and seclusion if you need that help. And what you want to do is hop on the Maine DOE web page, the one that's right on the screen right now, complete the contact form. You can also complete the contact form on the Lives in the Balance website. Let us know that you are interested in receiving additional help, and we will provide it at no cost. That's how passionate we are about helping schools in Maine reduce their use of restraint and seclusion to practically zero. Let's start looking at some of the questions that have come in. And if you have any questions, pop them in there. Does the definition of seclusion, Mary is asking, include exclusionary practices such as suspension and expulsion? That's not what people are usually referring to when they use the word seclusion. That's what people are referring to when they use the word you used, exclusion. I personally tend to think of seclusion as an isolation room. In prison, they call it solitary confinement. Suspension and expulsion, I tend to use the word exclusionary rather than seclusionary. Semantics, but a lot of people, that's how they use the terms. Susan is saying, it seems to me it is adults that need to be held accountable. We have left young people's problems go unsolved. Exactly right. And as you heard me say, that's pretty jarring for us caregivers when we start to come face to face with that. Look at all of these unsolved problems that we were sort of vaguely aware of, but we were so focused on the kids' concerning behaviors that we thought a discipline referral is what was going to take care of all of this, when in fact, a discipline referral could be expected to take care of none of this, because discipline referrals do not solve problems. What happens after most discipline referrals are behavior modification strategies. And there's the rub. There's the rub. That's it. Sarah is saying, is preventing a child from leaving a classroom until they complete a task, even if it is not considered a seclusion room, still considered a restrictive practice? The answer is it depends on who you're asking and where. There are places that I'm aware of that would call that a restrictive practice. I'm not sure how that would be thought of here in Maine, technically, but there are places that I've worked with where that would be considered restrictive. Sharon is asking, what if you're in a school district outside of Maine, but you're interested in assistance and training opportunities as well? Use the Lives in the Balance website contact form, and we will do whatever we can to help you out. Christy is asking, or at least saying, thanks so much for this. Our school is implementing, and it is always good to hear you speak, so grounding and affirming and reminding where the work lies. We gratefully consider this great work up in, you know I'm not going to be able to say that, right? Penetanguishene, Canada. Penetanguishene. Penetanguishene. I might have come close on one of those. I'm very glad you're doing the hard work. It is hard work to change our lenses, change our timing, change our practices. It's not as hard as a lot of people think it's going to be. And Lives in the Balance is here to help you out. Emily is saying, is it possible to implement both CPS and PBIS? I would not think so. My children's school is already engaged in the Maine DOE and Lives in the Balance collaboration regarding restraint and seclusion, which I'm thrilled about, but I'm confused why they continue to implement PBIS, although I know it's been teachers' norm for many years. That may be why they're continuing to implement PBIS. There may be parts of PBIS that they're finding to be very useful. The originators of PBIS will tell you that PBIS is basically a structure, not an intervention. 3 tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, that are there to help schools organize their efforts at helping kids. It's the beat when, and by the way, CPS has been implemented within the 3 tiers of PBIS in many, many schools, for schools that find those 3 tiers to be useful. Good. But many schools, when they're implementing PBIS, are overly focused on the B word, positive behavior interventions and supports. And there are interventions that are implemented in association with PBIS that are very focused on behavior. Check in, check out being a good example of that. That's when life starts to get a little bit more interesting in terms of the compatibility between PBIS and CPS. But there are many schools that have implemented CPS as part of PBIS, and it's gone extremely well, especially if the part of PBIS that they are focused on is the 3 tiers and less so on behavior rather than the problems that are causing those behaviors. And finally, from Sharon, unless another question pops in the next minute or two. Oh, this is nice, not a question, it's a comment. Thank you so much. Your message is so important and powerful. Thank you. Now our goal, Susan, I'm not going to read yours because you asked me not to, but thank you. Now the goal, if you're working at a school and you need help, please hop on that page on the Maine website and be in touch with us. We are eager to help you out. If you are a parent, oops, some more questions have come, oh no, there's some in the chat. If you are a parent, let your school know about that web page on the Maine DOE website. Let them know about the Lives in the Balance website and the truecrisisprevention.org website. Let them know that you are very committed to making sure that your child and other people's kids are treated in the most humane, compassionate, effective ways possible. Let them know. And if Lives in the Balance can do anything to help you out, you let us know too. Just a few more questions. Hi, Dr. Sellers. Can parent caregivers of ID brain damaged young people who have aged out of school get help through your site, with or without case manager? Be in touch and we'll do our best to help you out. And finally, Crystal, this is it. After this, we're done. What do you think of safe space or padded room in elementary school? Is this seclusion if the child has the option to go in there? If the child has the option to go in there, why is it padded? And just remember, what you're talking about is what I probably was talking about earlier, a calming corner. The equivalent of a calming corner, although it might be called something different. It's late. So if the kid is accessing the safe space frequently, that is usually an indicator that there are lots of problems that aren't yet solved or expectations that are being placed on the kid that they cannot yet meet. Safe spaces, padded rooms, at the very least, are late, even if the kid is choosing to go in there. I hope all of that makes sense. Once again, thank you to the Department of Education in the state of Maine for making all of this possible, and thanks to the Maine Parent Federation for making this hour possible. Now, don't be a stranger, be in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greene, for joining us. Thank you all for participating today. You will get a link to fill out a brief survey just to give us some feedback. And there is a recording of this webinar that will also be posted on our website by the end of this week. You can always contact us at www.mpf.org. That's our website with any questions that you may have and to access the recording. Thank you all again. We hope you have a wonderful day and happy holidays.